Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining. And today we're going to be talking about the best practices for securing your Docker images. So first of all, thank you for everyone for joining and welcome to this webinar. We're going to walk through the agenda very, very quickly. So if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, we're going to look at container security. So this is going to cover what is happening in the market today, looking at the landscape of the security in the container and Docker space. Then we're going to look at the Snyk offering, which is the Snyk Container Vulnerability Management environment, and we're going to look at how what offering Snyk can provide to secure your Docker images. We're then going to look at a case study, which is from Red Ventures, who we're very happy to join us on the call. And then we're going to also go into a demo to show you Snyk in action, followed by a live Q&A session. So that if you wanted to ask questions, if you go to your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the questions tab there. And from there, you can just type in your questions and your questions will be directed directly to Aner and Ben, our two participants, our two panelists on the webinar today, and we'll take those questions at the end. So I'm very happy to introduce our two panelists today, our two speakers. First of all, we have Aner. Aner has a very strong product background as the head of product management at Outbrain, and previous to that, he was an algorithmic R&D manager at VMware and Beehive Network. So we can ask Aner what that means perhaps in a little while. But today, Aner is the CPO, Chief Product Officer at Snyk, responsible for the Snyk product strategy and also delivering the open source security solutions for developers. So Aner, welcome to the webinar. How are you doing?
Hey, happy to be here.
Awesome. And where are you calling in from today, Aner?
So actually from the sunny Tel Aviv right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's awesome. We'll talk to you just shortly. And also joining Aner is Ben Gibbs. Ben used to work, in fact, his core is as a Linux and Unix system engineer. He's an engineer at heart. Used to work on the mainframe, moving over to cloud, and that's actually very dear to my heart as well. He designed and supported Java middleware infrastructure, and also introduced DevOps culture and concepts at Market America. Also working to introduce containers. His first taste of containers was at shop.com, introducing that to help the organization grow and scale. He joined Red Ventures in February of 2017 and was there really to architect and manage the container infrastructure and also the development practices at Red Venture, and also then joined the security team about 8 to 9 months ago at Red Ventures, focusing on how to deliver DevSecOps, how to create that pipeline, and also future-proof the security automation in the team. So thank you very much to Ben for joining us. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing very well, Simon. Thanks for having me.
That's our pleasure. And whereabouts are you calling in from, Ben?
I am in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Awesome. So welcome to both Aner and Ben. Let's talk a little bit and let's hear from both of you about Snyk and Red Ventures. So Aner, could you tell us a little bit about Snyk in 30 seconds or less?
Yeah. So the quick pitch is that we help developers and organizations use open source and stay secure. Open source is growing rapidly. It's what 99+% of the actual application that's running is comprised of. And with that growth in usage, we're seeing a lot of vulnerabilities, and we're building developer-first tools that can help developers both find and fix their vulnerabilities within their development workflows.
Wonderful. And Ben, if you could give us a quick intro into Red Ventures.
Sure. So we are at heart a digital marketing company, really with a pretty large global portfolio across many different industries. And we aim to create kind of custom buying experiences and match customers with our partners and affiliated networks through an application of data science.
Excellent, thank you very much. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Aner. Just a quick reminder to everyone, all our attendees listening, questions we can take at any point, just please add them to the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll pass those over to both Aner and Ben at the end of this webinar. So hold on for that till the end. Over to you, Aner.
Thanks a lot, Simon. So with Docker celebrating 6 years just just a short time ago. One of the things we're mainly seeing in the market is obviously the explosion and the exponential growth in the adoption of containers and the movement of workloads from the either on-prem or virtual environments to being Dockerized. A few key stats here: 50 billion containers downloaded to date. Over 1 billion containers downloaded every 2 weeks, and over 1 million applications in Docker Hub in the last year. And all of that is great. A few stats from a questionnaire that we put out as part of our State of Open Source Security report that we just launched a couple of weeks ago, which had a varied audience of recipients. One thing that actually surprised us, that entire report and questionnaire was both on open source security in general of applications, but also on Docker, was that over 70% of developers were using containers or planning to use them. So overall, a pretty large percentage, though not all of them yet. We would love to actually maybe do a quick poll here with our crowd, if we can do that, about whether you are using containers today and not, and we can then compare it maybe to these stats over here. Cool. So I'll move on, and we'll see in a bit. Simon, when you have the results, ping us and see where we're at. So one thing that we're definitely seeing is we're seeing also an exponential rise, not only in the usage of containers, but also in the vulnerabilities that are being reported in the operating system. You can see here example of Debian, Ubuntu, and how they're growing year over year. Definitely with adoption comes more focus on finding and reporting on new known vulnerabilities in these packages. This does not mean that that influx is just due to non-critical or non-severe vulnerabilities. As you can see here, there's also a very large rise in the amount of high and critical vulnerabilities when it comes to severity. We did this test where we took the top 10 most popular Docker images in Docker Hub, and we tested them for open source vulnerabilities. And we were actually pretty surprised to find out that all 10 had at least 30 vulnerabilities in them, with Node being the winner with 580 vulnerabilities running within that, or existing within that container. So definitely we can see that the fact that containers are a new way to deliver applications and deliver application infrastructure, they're definitely not kind of bulletproof when it comes to security. So, I mean, that was around looking at the growth of container adoption and the risk that they have in them. One thing that we looked is, and we're seeing in general in Snyk over 250,000 applications that we're monitoring. We were testing how many of those Docker images have a base image that they could upgrade or rebuild, that will create an image that is more secure and has less vulnerabilities. And the reality is that 53% of the Docker images that we scan, they have a better base image that the developers can upgrade to, that will be more secure. So it was also great to see, and it is great to see, that not only there are a lot of vulnerabilities, but they are being handled with versions, and developers can have an action that will help them mitigate and minimize the problem. Most vulnerabilities originate in the base image, so just for those who are not aware and are not familiar too much, I'll show it later on. But in general, a Docker image has various layers. Base image is kind of what you're building on top of, and then the different layers that you're adding to it. Most of those vulnerabilities come from that base image, and see here the differences, for example, between Node, Slim, and Alpine. Just small comment here that on Alpine, they don't have a formal security program. So this could be somewhat different, but still, you can see the large differences in that, and that's kind of one of the key actions that developers can do to reduce risk. One question that we asked in that questionnaire was, who do you think should own the security of container images? And this actually pretty surprised us, that most of the crowd, this was a multi-selection kind of answer, said that developers definitely are key owners for container images security. And that also makes sense, because at the end of the day, they're the only ones who can fix them by changing various definitions, either base image or other things in the Docker file that they're building. A little bit about Snyk. So with that, we've come to offer really a developer-first solution that's focusing on fixes. So when it comes to testing, having intimate integrations with the various developer tools, such as Git, where the Docker file sits, within the CI/CD, where the Docker file is being built, the various registries where it can be stored, etc. So all of these are points throughout the software development lifecycle where we tap into, analyzing them. So understanding each vulnerability, from which layer it came from, understanding the dependency tree. So if there's a vulnerable package, how did it get introduced into that image? Detecting also binaries that weren't installed through a package manager. So if you're doing some wget and installing, untarring a node server, and then really driving actionability and driving fix, whether it's recommending a specific fix on a specific vulnerability, whether it's upgrading for a different base image and automating that with fixing pull requests. We do also test for any image change and alert on any newly disclosed vulnerabilities on packages that already have existed before. So this is really a Snyk solution to this problem. And I'm happy to have today, without further ado, Ben with us today to discuss how Red Ventures is tackling Docker security. So hi, Ben.
In fact, one thing I'd love to do as well is to ask Ben, and both Ben and Aner, what do you think? We'll show the poll results now. What do you think the responses we had were? Do you think they're mostly Docker users or container users? Mostly not. What do you think?
I'd say at this point, probably more often than not, they're users.
Okay, awesome. And Aner?
I'd go with our crowd to 75, 80% as well.
Okay, awesome. So let's push that over to everyone. And wow, 100% of everyone who is on the call right now is using containers today. So that's awesome to hear. You are on the right call. I'm pleased about that. So without further ado, as Aner said, over to Ben.
Cool. So Ben, kind of a few questions to you. So maybe we start with a quick answer on how you and your team are using Docker today at Red Ventures.
Yeah, we've got a pretty large footprint. We're a very polyglot shop, so we've got several different language types and very distributed kind of internal team culture. So we've got pretty much, I would say every team has at least one service or application that is Dockerized in some capacity. Most of those are around microservices, some batch processing and that sort of thing. And kind of outside of the deployment use cases for our developers, we started replacing kind of a lot of the traditional infrastructure where we would need Chef or Puppet or something like this to provision out a kind of core infrastructure server to do something. We started moving that over and actually using containers. It's helped us dramatically simplify server configuration and really just kind of focus at the container image layer. And it's really helpful for us as well for local testing. It's really easy to spin up these environments, do the testing that you need to, and that's kind of removes things like Vagrant from being necessary for us.
Yeah, it definitely, we're seeing that, a key driver for agility is definitely something that's really driving adoption. Could you share some of the top challenges your team faced around securing your Docker containers?
Yeah, so that's I could talk for hours on that, but I know we have limited time here. But really, a couple of key points that were really challenging for us, and it's still something that we're working through. But a lot of it is the kind of methodology that you approach container security. Traditionally, security has kind of been this sort of central entity that kind of dictates standards and has kind of tools that are outside the reach of everybody else, and that really can sometimes get met with a lot of opposition. People don't really like it, and we started thinking about the nature of a container, and I was pleased to see that in the survey results that were mentioned, in terms of who were kind of the owners of containers, 68% said that developers were the owners, and that was kind of how we started to think about this too. And so developer education was a really big part of that, kind of reframing in their mind that a image is also a software artifact, and it is kind of buried together with your code. It's not this abstracted thing that is kind of its own standalone Linux instance. And so I think once we really started to kind of break down some of those conceptual barriers, it made it a little easier for us to start kind of evangelizing and selling security internally for that. And also getting meaningful data, meaningful feedback out of existing container security tools that we had tried in the past. It was really a hard challenge to give something to the developer in a way that made sense and they could easily digest, and they knew how to take actionable results to remediate it.
Yeah, I think, and maybe we'll touch on that later, but I think definitely developer education and kind of the understanding of ownership is a key part here. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, there's a lot of options out there. Why did you choose Snyk? And you can tell us a little bit about how you use Snyk today.
Yeah, so we were existing customers using Snyk's open source dependency analysis feature. And that was something that development teams, we noticed very early on, they really enjoyed that. They enjoyed kind of being empowered and having those security tools given to them, and they were able to move at the speeds that they need to. And so once the kind of Docker image piece, the analysis piece came out, we started looking at this, and it made sense for us to sort of marry the view that developers have of their application with Snyk, with the dependencies, and then the image. Because at the end of the day, all of this represents dependencies that are being brought in. And to give them a kind of unified view with that, and then be able to track those releases and see over time how they atrophied and what new vulnerabilities were introduced, they were automatically alerted of those new vulnerabilities. And kind of before, we had really tried to take this, as I mentioned, sort of central approach where we had some automation and we had some tools in place to go out and kind of assess what we already had running in the environment and deliver those results to developers. And teams already get quite a few notifications, and especially if it's a notification from some sort of tool that they don't directly manage or kind of has direct impact on their day-to-day workflows, it tends to get ignored. So Snyk was really nice in terms of the feature set there to let us give that same information to the developers in a unified view. In addition to that, the kind of SaaS nature of the tool is really attractive as well. A lot of the existing sort of enterprise-grade container security products that are out there require you to maintain some pretty robust internal infrastructure, which creates some challenges around access controls and that sort of thing. And so Snyk let us really focus more on solving the problem of security and developer relationships than building some kind of opaque infrastructure and then just telling people to start using it.
And yeah, and when you were using and the teams were using Snyk, where would you say they saw kind of some significant value or various kind of value points to that?
Yeah, the really big one for us that was a takeaway was kind of picking the right base image for something. I used to get bombarded with requests from different teams saying, hey, I'm interested in trying out this image. Can you do an analysis on it and let me know if it's safe? How many vulnerabilities are there? And started thinking, well, that's an easy problem to solve, but we haven't communicated that well to others, and the tooling that we had in place didn't really facilitate that. So once teams had access to Snyk and they were able to start using it, and before they started a project, they could pull down an image, run a test against that, and immediately get that feedback and see if it was kind of at our acceptable risk threshold. And that was a really big value add for us. And then in addition to that is also kind of the Docker file recommendation feature, or excuse me, Docker image recommendation feature. So they've got something that is just riddled with vulnerabilities. It's really easy for them to find something that will kind of be a cleaner base image that they can pull down and start using.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's one of the loved capabilities. I think where so many times Docker images could have, like we saw before, 100 or 150 vulnerabilities, which it's very hard to know. Okay, now what do I do with this? And connecting that to kind of actionable changes that you can do is very valuable. Otherwise, everybody just starts to ignore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have like any, I don't know, tips or best practices you'd like to share with folks here around Docker security in general, around your experience with the Snyk tool?
Sure, and it's not just limited to kind of Snyk in general, but this is kind of just some overarching things that I've learned over time here that I think could help others be successful, especially if you're kind of starting out on this journey. And one of those is focus on educating the developers, kind of understanding conceptually what a container is and how it's different from sort of a kind of previous legacy deployment methods and strategies. A lot has changed there, and kind of this whole DevSecOps movement is about moving as leftmost as possible to start interacting with the developer, put the security as close to them as possible, and then from there you catch more things as it moves through your life cycle. So if you can kind of open source your development security across those teams and distribute it, you have more eyes on things, and it makes it, as an organization, you really start to benefit from that instead of having to be confronted with the fact that all of a sudden you have multiple critical vulnerabilities out there and you have no idea how they got there. Now we're able to really stop all of that from happening right at the developer workstation before it moves through any of the CI pipelines or anything like that. Kind of second point here would be, be weary of following some of the existing online guides and things for implementing Docker, especially within a CI workflow. There's a lot of kind of contradictory and bad advice out there, especially with regards to the Docker socket and CI security. You can effectively give root to your host if you follow some of the guides that are out there for Jenkins and stuff. So just kind of double check that. And really start thinking through, understand the fundamentals of Docker before you actually go and decide to roll that out. Otherwise, you're really going to be in for a headache. And then kind of last key takeaway here is, containers have really facilitated this kind of secure software life cycle and chain where we can have provenance from, all the way from the kind of dependencies that are used to the code that's in there and the image that it's running on, and you can sign all of that and move it through your release cycle. That's a really advantageous strategy. It's hard to do, but containers make that easier to do for you. And if you're starting out, you're going to have a much better time than trying to retrofit that into an existing process that may not be able to scale. So start thinking about that early on, and you'll reap tremendous benefits.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you.
I think we'll jump into a short demo, maybe to see beyond slides where we're at. So, can you see my screen well? Okay, cool. So this is Snyk. This is the Snyk UI, and I'm going to go to the integrations tab. This is where you can see all the integrations Snyk has with various source code management systems like GitHub, etc. And one of those integrations are integrations with various registries. We'll go to here to Docker Hub, click on Add Project. What it does right now is, given that I've provided credentials, it connects to Docker Hub, sees all the images that exist over there. I can choose one. I can decide to add those selected images. And now they will be added. As you can see here, I can actually filter out, and I see that I have this Docker image here that has been added to Snyk. It has been scanned. Obviously, this is also a demo Docker image, but trust me, there's a lot of them that look out there that look similar. So this one has 25 high severity vulnerabilities, 73 medium severity, and 364 low severity vulnerabilities. I can click one of them. I want to now drill in, and what I'll be able to see then is to see all the different issues themselves. You can see here that I have an arbitrary code execution vulnerability in glibc, etc. What you can see on top of here is the various recommendations of what we can change the base image to. One second. Another thing that I'll show, it'll open up in a second. Another thing that I'll show is the fact that I have here different vulnerabilities. Some of them, oh, okay, here it is. So you can see here that I'm using today Node 6.14.2 Slim. Okay, I can upgrade to Node 6.14.3 Slim that has only 138 vulnerabilities, 19 high, 23 medium, 96 low. I can do a major upgrade to Node 11.10.1 Slim, which will have significantly less vulnerabilities, or I can go to Node 10.15 Stretch Slim if I don't want to go all the way to 11 that has the same amount of vulnerabilities. So you can see here that this base image upgrades provides me a significant decrease in the number in my exposure, and gives me also kind of all the options that that I have in order to do that, whether it's a minor, major, or an alternative image. The second thing is following. So by the way, also all these vulnerabilities here are enriched and curated by Snyk. Obviously, the fact that this is an arbitrary code execution and has here all the text on it and says how it was introduced, etc. This is all data that Snyk provides versus just something that says, hey, there's a CVE number or something that says very little. I can filter out now also so one thing I wanted to show, I'll show maybe later, is what this Docker file actually looks like. We'll see that in a second. But there's also the node service that's running on this Docker machine. So that was actually not installed as part of the base image itself. It was not installed as part of the package manager like APK, Dev, and others that are installing packages on open source system. Or rather, we scanned the entire image to look for it and others. You can see here that there's this denial of service in Node. It's introduced in Node 6.14.2, and you need to upgrade to 6.15.0 to get rid of it. Okay, so again, actionable advice both in when it comes to specific vulnerabilities, but also when it comes to a base image and a pretty easy import from Docker Hub. So this is the scanning that starts with Registry. I also want to show you what a CI/CD or a developer tool, developer-side scan would look like. So I'll open the terminal here. Before that, I did want to show you what the Docker file looks like here. So this is a Docker file, pretty simple. This is the Node 16.14.2 that we saw before, and these are just two simple installations that we did. For example, ImageMagick was something we installed and added on top of this base image itself. What I'll do here is I'll run, one second. So what I'll do here is I'll run Snyk test, which is our command line, running it on Carney Snyk Docker goof image and pointing that to its Docker file. What it does now is it scans the image for all the dependencies, all the open source packages that are found in it, queries it against the Snyk vulnerability database, and will then output all the vulnerabilities that are being found. By the way, this output can also come in a JSON format or any programmatic format to that extent. And you can see here kind of all the vulnerabilities. The summary at the end is pretty similar. You can see here various vulnerabilities. For example, like we saw before, high severity no, denied will service, where it should be upgraded to. Okay, and now what I want to show you also is the fact that it says on each image how it was being introduced. So these, for example, were introduced by the base image, as you can see over here. But you can see that this high severity vulnerability of the image magic, which we saw before, was introduced by this Docker file line, run apt-get installed image magic. So really, this helps a lot to pinpoint exactly whether a vulnerability came from the base image, and then we can upgrade it and change it to minimize our risk, or if something came from various processes that we've added later on, we can know exactly which it came from, and then what we need to do in order to remediate them. So I think that that's of the Snyk solution throughout the various touch points in the developer lifecycle. May have from the crowd.
Okay, so Aner, if you wouldn't mind just dropping back to the slides just quickly. Perfect. And go, there we go. I just wanted to, in fact, one previously to that one, Aner.
Sure.
There we go. So we just wanted to in fact, first of all, we will take questions Q&A after. We already have a couple in the GoToWebinar, so please do just type your questions in there, and I'll ask both Aner and Ben just after this. Quickly wanted to mention that if you wanted to learn more about how you can secure your Docker images and run some trials of Snyk, feel free to schedule a meeting at snyk.io, but please do contact your existing sales manager, and we can set you up with some free trials with straight away, and you can try this out for yourself on your own systems. So on to the next slide, then we're happy to take questions, and we have some questions already in. So if I quickly just jump to that. So first up, we have a question from Hans, which is taking one step back, I guess, from this demo. And how would you integrate this Snyk container scanning into the CI/CD workflow?
Great. So the best way is usually to add it as a step in the pipeline, another build step that runs what we call Snyk tests, which I saw before. And what we also enable is to have various policies, which you can decide whether you also want to potentially break a build or not, or run some other workflow based on that. So that's the Snyk test. You can also run a monitor, which would mean that even if you want this build to pass, you would still want Snyk to alert you whether new vulnerabilities on that build have been found. So really a relatively simple build step in the pipeline is kind of the way to go.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, we add one thing to that as well. Really great points on that. And one other thing that we've done to be successful with this too, depending on the CI tool that's out there, we've actually created a GitHub app that integrates as a pull request status check. And so from there, we can actually do not only the Snyk test, but then we can also run a suite of other sort of container security tools, Docker file linting, all of that, and then post that back as a comment to the pull request. And that's been one way that we've been able to easily onboard teams with this without having to reconfigure their CI solution.
That's a really interesting point, actually, and brings up a bigger question there, Ben. In terms of when we think about asking developers to kind of take more and more on like this, security being one of many things that developers have to do. Did you run into any internal friction when trying to implement Docker security, or also allow developers to try and test for Docker, vulnerabilities in their Docker images as well?
Not so much friction as much, not necessarily political friction, but it's really getting workflows put together that make sense for the teams that are using them. And there's not really a one-size-fits-all solution for that. And we've got a lot of different CI tools out there across the business. And so we kind of started with a really vague sort of, we need to get this implemented, and people understood the need from that. And then from there, we started to kind of work with some of our top internal evangelists among the development teams, and set them up for success with the tool, showed them the options that we had available for it, and then kind of let them go out and spread the word from there. And then it spread like wildfire.
And that's a great way, I guess, to have that developer ownership, right? To have internal developer advocates or evangelists. How did you onboard through the entire development team? Was it literally through the evangelists, or were there other wider schemes that you were running to try and get other developers on board?
Yeah, it started out with the evangelist, and I would say that probably carried us 50-60% along the way, and then the rest of it was just kind of ongoing communication out through the rest of the teams, and then doing some workshops on it and stuff. And a lot of it had to do as well with how we framed and marketed what we were doing. People like to be challenged. They like to have a good challenge for something, and so we kind of framed this as, this is a really hard problem to solve across the industry. You see that, every day there are reports coming out about image vulnerabilities and this and that. And so we framed it as, this is something that we can now solve internally that other companies are, top companies are struggling with. And that created a really strong drive and a sense of accomplishment for those teams. And so they wanted to rise to that challenge. And we noticed that was a really effective tool.
Awesome. Another question in from the GoToWebinar chat. Are you planning, this one's for Aner, are you planning to support the GitLab container registry as well as the Docker Hub?
Yes, definitely. We have a long list, and we've really been an infrastructure that adding another registry is fairly simple. We already have a few customers that are asking for the GitLab registry as well, on top of ECR, another factory, a container registry, GCR. So the list is long, but we plan on adding all of these in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. And are you able to share any more of the roadmap in terms of what's next going forward with the support for Docker or containers?
Yeah, definitely. So some of the things that we've discussed but haven't yet demoed, because there are the things that we're still baking. So a part of integrating to all these Docker registries, really automating fixing is the next phase. So what you've seen today is a lot of recommendations, upgrade to this or change to that. We really want to automate that. So think about the fact that we're monitoring the image in the registry, as well as the Docker file in the Git. And if we're seeing that maybe the image is 3 weeks old and a rebuild will generate and pull fixes that will have less vulnerabilities, we will automatically trigger these fixes. We will automatically open a pull request, either with an upgrade or an empty pull request just with a comment, so that a build is being triggered until kind of the loop is closed. So really automating the fixes is one thing that we're looking to do. We're also planning on extending to see what's being loaded in runtime. So for example, again, the main problem of minimizing the noise and focusing you on what matters. Many times images have a very large set of open source packages that only a few of them are actually being loaded by your Slim Node or JVM application. and you want to know where to focus and where not to, and which are relevant and which are not. So this will take us more to focus also on runtime and also securing, both knowing what's running and what's not, and then also taking some measures to secure containers as they're being run.
Excellent. And this is an interesting question about triaging, right, as well, in terms of, when you get this many vulnerabilities in your Docker containers, or Docker images, should I say, what do you focus on first? There's an interesting, I've been having a discussion with Christian actually on the chat, and one of the questions he's alluding to in this chat is about how to know when your vulnerabilities are actually exploitable, in terms of, are you really at risk? And some of the kind of runtime stuff that you were talking about there, will that somewhat go to being able to triage issues you have?
Yes, definitely so. I mean, it will help you to understand whether something is effectively a false positive or not. This is why many of our customers, for example, want to see differently and filter out and treat differently, for example, the JVM that they're running, the Java they're running, or the application server that they're running, whether it's Tomcat or something else, or the node server, because they know for sure that this is part of what's being executed on in their app, versus a vulnerability that is in some package that that they don't even know is in use. So if we can do whatever we can with with the base image recommendations, with the upgrades for the various layers that you're adding on the user, with understanding what's loaded, if we could take all of these together and really both minimize the risk but also focus on removing the irrelevant noise, could really, leave you with a problem you can actually handle, versus something that many teams today are kind of shying away of actually facing.
Great, and I'd love to actually pass that over to Ben as well, in terms of, I know I was talking about the kind of irrelevant noise, that noise of when you have the hundreds of vulnerabilities. What do you focus on first? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how you do this at Red Ventures.
Yeah, and that's a really hard question. So, most organizations are going to have some sort of vulnerability management program, and you're going to have a kind of set threshold of time to remediate vulnerabilities once they're discovered. And so we kind of have a contractual relationship with our teams to make sure that they understand that they are responsible for that. And so from there, we kind of let them manage a lot of the updates and re-rolling it. And then as part of a sort of break glass feature in the event that we need to release an emergency fix for something, we've got some automation in place where we can actually re-trigger those builds and redeploy those images after they've been tested and vetted that that vulnerability is gone. One thing that this has kind of led us to start thinking about is maintaining our own base images and really slimming those down and kind of removing a lot of the unnecessary cruft that's in there. And if you look at really the node base image, or even Debian at this point, a lot of those vulnerabilities are kind of irrelevant packages for things. But in our world, I don't really want to get too comfortable with saying, well, this isn't necessarily directly exploitable, don't worry about that. We try to keep kind of think about it as if this is a threat. This is going to be an existing kind of ongoing problem that we have to deal with. So just shrinking the total number of vulnerabilities, essentially, and also just eradicating any highs or criticals that are out there, I think is primarily important. But beyond that, anything that we can do to shrink that number, I think is a really big win.
Awesome, that's great. So we're coming up to the end of time. A couple of things that I will mention is that this whole webinar has been recorded and will be made available to you afterwards. So do check out our communications. That will send you the recording of this webinar. I want to say a big thank you to both Aner and Ben for the time and the wonderful presentations and demos that you gave. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I'm sure our attendees enjoyed listening to it.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Thanks, Ben.
No worries. So yeah, just to mention that again, if you wanted to do a trial of this, please do just reach out directly to your sales managers for your accounts, and we can get those trials set up for you. And with that, I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and see you soon on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.